So this session is Solidarity on the Right to Family Life, Inclusive Campaigns for Change. So here we're exploring what different social movements, including the disabled people's movement and LGBTQI movements, can learn from each other in designing and implementing campaigns for change on the right to family life. The session will be facilitated by Eilionóir Flynn here next to me on from the Centre for Disability Law and Policy. And Eilionóir, of course, is a particular expert on advocacy and access to justice, but has a great range of expertise on disability more generally. Next to Eilionóir, we have Christina Burke. Christina is a service user with the Brothers of Charity, and she lives independently, and she's the Secretary of the National Platform of Self-Advocates and a member of the Inclusive Research Network, and sits on various other committees. Next to Christina, we have Phil Davy. So Phil Davy lives in Ballyfermot, and she's been involved in self-advocacy for nearly 30 years. She was the chairperson of the Connect People Network and has been involved in various advisory campaigns at a political level. Next to Phil, we have Minogue. Ger is from County Clare and is the founder member of the Clare Inclusive Research Group and Inclusive Research Network, and again has been involved in various legislative campaigns. Then next to Ger, we have Tambudzai Gonese, who is the programme lawyer for the Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights Programme with the Southern Africa Litigation Centre. And she's engaged in working with and providing support for lawyers and organisations in Southern Africa to promote respect for and ensure the protection of sexual and reproductive health rights through strategic litigation and advocacy. And then finally, at my far left, your far right, we have Reshma Valliappan, who is the founder director of The Red Door, which uses creativity to redefine mental ill health and other disorders. And she also works closely with community schools to empower boys and girls through sex-gender education. So, as I say, we've a lot to get through. The format will be the same as in our last session. Eilionóir will ask questions and facilitate a discussion with our various panelists, and then we're going to try and open the question and answer session for a little longer because we had a lot of questions the last time and we didn't get to everyone that we would have liked to get to. So we're going to aim to try and get half an hour for questions and answers at the end this time, if we can do that, depending on how things go. So I'll hand you over to Eilionóir now.
Thanks very much, Lucy, and welcome back, everybody. So we're going to be speaking about two different types of what we're calling decriminalisation work in this session. So the first experience that the first three panellists Lucy introduced are going to speak with me about is some work that we did together to try to change the law on the right to have sexual relationships for people with disabilities in Ireland. So I'm going to explain before we start what the law was before and what the law is now, and then I'm going to ask all of our first three panellists a series of questions about how they were involved and what they think about what happened. And then the second part of our panel discussion will be focusing on a different kind of decriminalisation work, and that is decriminalising sexual relationships among members of the LGBTQI community. So in that part of our discussion, I'm going to be asking Tambudzai and Resh to tell us a bit more about their work in Southern Africa and in India, respectively, on these kinds of campaigns and strategies, and particularly on the involvement of disabled people in those campaigns. So without further ado, I'm going to start by giving you a very brief background to the current law and previous law in Ireland on sexual relationships for people with disabilities. So, ironically enough, it was the 1993 Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act, which decriminalised homosexuality, very important, but at the same time introduced a specific offence of sexual intercourse with a mentally impaired person. And that law said that it was a criminal offence to have sexual intercourse with a person with, and this is the language used in the law, mental handicap or mental illness, where the person's impairment was such that they were incapable of living an independent life or of guarding themselves against serious exploitation. It's important to remember that consent was not a defence to this offence, and it didn't matter whether the two people involved both had the same disability or not, whether one person had a disability and one person did not. That was irrelevant. And consent was not a defence. But interestingly, marriage was a defence. So even though 3 years previously we had changed our law so that we recognised that rape could occur within marriage, we retained, in some strange way, a version of that with this specific offence. So as you can tell, this is a very bad law. Nobody was very happy with it. And a lot of people's experiences, as we'll hear about in their lives and in the services that were supporting them, was that this law was being interpreted to mean that people were not being supported to have sexual relationships at all if they had a label of intellectual disability. So it had a real chilling effect, and service providers were not sure about whether they could support people to have relationships because they felt that perhaps that would bring them too within the scope of the criminal law. So I'll ask our panellists in a moment about all the things that happened to try to change that, but I just want to tell you one important part of that before I open, which is that something that helped to move the law along, in my view, was the airing of a documentary, which some people in the room may have seen, called Somebody to Love. If anyone remember that, yeah? So, and Sarah Fitzgerald, who spoke during the panels earlier in the week, was actually one of the people featured in that documentary. That documentary was about all kinds of experiences of people with different disabilities, about their relationships and their family lives. And Sarah and her partner and their daughter featured in that documentary as well. So it was really, that was the first time, I think, that a lot of the general population in Ireland even learned that there was such a law that didn't allow people with intellectual disabilities to have sex. And a lot of people were really taken aback by that. I remember being on Twitter when the documentary aired, and a lot of people were tweeting saying, like, this is very strange. How can we still have such a law in Ireland? One of the people who saw the documentary and decided to try and do something about it was, at the time, Senator Catherine Zappone, who was one of the foremost proponents of marriage equality in Ireland. Together with her wife, Anne-Louise Gilligan, they took the first piece of strategic litigation to try to challenge the denial of recognition for same-sex couples. And while that case was not successful, and they were very involved in the campaign, the referendum campaign, which ultimately was successful, to recognise marriage equality. So Catherine felt that from her own personal experience, she knew what it felt like for the state not to recognise your relationship, and so she could recognise this was happening to another group in Irish society with people with disabilities and wanted to help. So she asked ourselves in the Centre for Disability Law and Policy if we would work with her and bring her together with some other campaigners who could work with her to develop a new law that she would try to introduce as a private member's bill. So, in case you don't know what a private member's bill is, any member of our Parliament can introduce a piece of legislation, but unless legislation is introduced by the government, it is very unlikely to actually be passed. One important, I suppose, exception to that more recently, which is relevant, was the Irish Sign Language Bill, which was not introduced by government, but was nonetheless passed. So, Catherine tried her approach with the private members bill, and we'll hear more from our panellists about the work on that. But as we expected, it did not pass. But what we did get was an agreement from the Minister for Justice to take what Catherine was doing very seriously when they introduced their own government bill to change the law. And in Catherine's bill, it was proposed to remove this old law completely and to introduce a new law that would protect both people with disabilities and people without disabilities from being sexually exploited by people who had power over them. So that might be an employer-employee relationship, it might be a teacher-student relationship, It might be someone providing care and support to someone who may or may not have a disability. Could be an older person, for example. So that was Catherine's approach, and government said they would take that seriously. What we have now is the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017. And they did delete the old Section 5 from the 1993 Act, but for the price of one, we got 2 new offences. So one is a sexual offence with what's called a protected person. So they learned that language like mentally impaired is bad, and they learned that language like vulnerable is bad. So they went with protected instead. But if you look at how protected person is defined, it's very similar to how the other terms were defined. So a protected person is a person with a mental illness or an intellectual disability who is not capable, according to the functional test of mental capacity, of making the decision to have sex. So that means that the person does not understand the information about the decision, or is not able to remember the information about the decision, or is not able to weigh up the different options to make a decision or communicate the decision to others. So even if you can understand, remember, and weigh up your options, but you can't communicate, you will be found not to have capacity to consent to sex. So that's a criminal offence. And the other criminal offence is somewhat similar to what Catherine proposed. It's an offence against a relevant person, also not vulnerable, relevant person, by a person in a position of authority. And relevant person is also a person with a mental illness or intellectual disability who is unable to, whose disability severely restricts them in the ability to guard themselves against exploitation. Okay, so you can see there are very similar definitions still being used in our current law. And a person, so what's clear is that what Catherine had asked for was that this would not just apply to people with disabilities, but what the government has done is actually make sure that this only applies to people with disabilities. So, and just for wider context, that is also the same piece of legislation in which the Nordic model was introduced for sex work. So it criminalises the purchase of sex. Supposedly it does not criminalise actual sex workers, and yet just very recently 2 sex workers were convicted of the offence of brothel keeping for living together and working together. So there were a lot of, it wasn't, again, when I was on Twitter, when the law was being passed, it was me and a lot of angry people who were supporting sex workers who were unhappy with what was happening in the bill. The bill, actually, the law, the Act of 2017 also includes a lot of offences related to child sexual abuse. So it gives you a bit of a sense of the kinds of populations that are being grouped together in need of protection in these kinds of laws. But I'm going to stop talking now and start asking questions of the group. So my first question that I want to ask, and I might start with you, Ger. There is a mic here. Maybe Christina, would you pass it down? So the first question I want to ask is, and I'll ask this of all 3 of the first panellists, why did you want to change the law in Ireland about relationships for people with disabilities?
What was it again? Oh yeah. The earlier law that was being oh yeah, like,
you found out about that?
oh yeah. Oh yeah. When I went up to today with Kenny show, that's it was the first I heard of it. But then I was saying it is because I'm a Down syndrome.
So nobody told you?
Nobody has told me, but I felt that the family should have been less to know. We should have been the first to know
That there was a law at all?
that there was a law at all to have sex.
Okay, so maybe I'll just explain what Pat Kenny is to our international audience who might not know. That was a radio programme, right? That, do you remember roughly what year that was that you went on that programme?
It would be about 2009.
Yeah, 2009.
2009? Okay, so that was the first time that you found out that it was actually a crime for someone to have sex with a person with an intellectual disability.
Yeah.
Okay, and you felt that no one had told people themselves about this law,
No.
and that was a big problem.
Yes.
Okay.
And then this mess I find very comical now that John McGrath fell off his chair when he held about her.
And he wrote a chapter in the book.
He wrote a chapter in a book saying, I've broken the law many times.
Yes. That's a chapter in a book by Kelly Johnson, I think, and some other
Kelly Johnson,
people.
yeah.
So I would encourage you to read that. But yeah, the title of the chapter is I've Broken the Law Many Times. Yeah, if that's the law, I've broken the law many times. Sorry?
It was a book.
A book, yeah. Thanks, Ger. So I might ask the same question to Phil now, if you pass the mic on to her. So Phil, why did you want to change the law in Ireland about relationships?
I felt the old law wasn't fair, and it stopped consenting adults with disabilities from having relationships.
Okay, thank you, Phil. So you felt it was just unfair and it wouldn't allow people who were consenting to have sex?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Christina, can I ask you the same question now?
Same question. Is it the first one?
Yeah.
Why did you want to change the law in Ireland about relationships for people with disabilities? Why did you want to change the law in Ireland about relationships for people with disabilities?
Can you answer it?
Because it is a tricky topic to start with when it comes to family. They're the ones that it doesn't go down well with. If you said you were doing a line, families are worried you might get an infectious disease or get pregnant.
So-
Like HIV,
Yeah.
mostly.
So families are worried about what might happen to people if they have sex.
Exactly.
And I just want to explain the term doing a line for our international audience, which is, do you want to explain what it is, Christina?
You do it.
Okay. So, going out with someone, dating someone, having a relationship with someone. Whoops, I think.
You're full.
Sorry. Okay. Good timing, right? Right. So now it's time for my second question. So, what did you want the new law to look like? So, Christina, maybe I'll start with you this time. You ready? What would you say? What did you want the new law to look like? I have to use the mic again.
Question.
We have written an answer.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sit down with the politicians and have them listen to us or have a conference. There shouldn't be a separate law for people with disabilities when it comes to relationships. The new law should be improved to be more in line with the UN Convention.
Okay, so it was important for you that in making the new law that the politicians would listen to you and listen to what you wanted, and for the law to be in line with the UN Convention.
Yeah.
Can I ask you the same question, Phil? Maybe Christina, you pass her the mic.
Sorry, I felt the law should be able to consent, and that didn't treat us differently. And we wanted a law that applied to everyone, not a special law, for people with disabilities.
Thank you, Phil. I'm going to ask the same question to you now, Ger. What did you want the new law to look like?
I can't think of it again. Oh yeah, the law it should be the same for everybody. that the law should be same for everybody. And there should be no any difference that people should have relationship.
Okay.
And
So-
I am in a relationship. I'm not going to say who.
Good for you. George just said he is in a relationship, so that's good. So I suppose what I'm hearing from all of you is that you really didn't want people with disabilities to be treated differently in the law. You wanted to have the same right as anybody else to have a relationship. I remember when we were talking about the law with Catherine that some people were worried about people being taken advantage of and wanted to make sure everyone had a right to be safe as well. But I know when we were talking, people were saying the best way to stay safe is to have good sex education and good information, and that's much better than a criminal law to actually keep people safe. Do you want to add anything to that, Ger?
Not really, no.
Okay, that's cool. So I'm going to ask the third question now, and we might start with Phil this time. So I'm going to ask you, how did you get involved in working with Catherine Zappone?
Eleanor asked self-advocacy groups to get involved in advising Catherine Zappone. Catherine Zappone listened to us
Oh, yeah,
and took us up seriously. It was a good experience.
Thanks, Phil. So Christina, I might come to you now to the same question. How did you start working with Catherine Zappone?
She came to visit the first committee of the National Platform of Self-Advocates. She was very strong-willed and determined to do something about the topic of relationships. She saw a documentary about it, or saw people talking about it online. She had a meeting with us in Inclusion Ireland. She asked us to come to another meeting in Boswell's Hotel about changing the law. We came up with a few strong points for her. There was a launch in Mirren Hotel, and I did an interview for the radio about the why to have a relationship. We went to the Shannon the same day and watched Catherine introduce the bill. Are you happy with the new law we know?
We'll do that one in a minute, Christina, actually. Is that okay? So you're talking there about some of the different steps of working with Catherine. So first of all, she came to meet the National Platform just to hear, sit, and I think she had lunch with you guys, right? And she just listened to what you were telling her. I think I remember at that meeting, she explained that she was someone who also the state was not recognising her relationship. And I can't remember who it was, but I know someone in the group was like, yeah, but we're having a referendum on that soon, you'll be fine. We have the big problem. We're still not going to get our rights. So I remember that, and I think it was an interesting way of working that then myself and another colleague here, Anna, worked on some drafts of the law, and then we worked together with you guys to make easy read versions of the law, and also to talk about how the law should be launched. So we kind of planned that event together, and then Catherine had a press conference and had that launch event, and I think a couple of you spoke at that, or you were all at that anyway. And some of you did some media stuff around it. So Christina, you mentioned you were on the radio talking about it. And that was really important. So at all stages of developing the law, Catherine was trying to be inclusive and working with groups to see what they wanted and to check back to make sure that what she was doing was something that people were happy with. So I'm going to come to the last question now. And I might start with you again, Ger, this time, if that's okay. So my last question is, are you happy with the new law that we now have? Oh, Ger, did I ask you at all about working with Catherine? I did?
No.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ger. Can you tell me that first? Getting ahead of myself here.
How do you get working with Catherine? Sorry.
It's turning.
Oh, inclusive, oh yeah. Through the Inclusive Research Network. And through the Inclusive Research Network and the law reform. We got invited by the Inclusive Research to speak to the Law Reform Commission and to make sure that that bill had to be passed. Yeah.
So that was even before Catherine started working on this. That's a really important reminder that you guys met with Patricia Rickard-Clark at the Law Reform Commission.
That's right, yeah.
Because they were also coming up with ideas for the new law and what it should look like.
Yeah.
And you gave them your views on what was important to change about that law. And they also published a report before Catherine started working on this about the law. And then working with Catherine specifically, do you remember the meetings that Christina was talking about in Dublin? There was one in Boswell's, the place opposite the Dáil.
Yes.
And then there was a launch in the Marion Hotel, and then we went to watch the debate in the Shannon when Catherine introduced the bill.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about that?
No.
Okay. So then now you can answer my last question, which is, are you happy with the new law we now have, Ger?
How do I figure that one out?
It's okay.
I still think it's not right. Not right to. Oh yeah, there should be law for protected people. Verbal, non-verbal. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The law should be applies to different people. No, okay. We don't want to be protected by this law.
So you're not very happy with the new law then, are you? No. Okay. So Phil, can I ask you the same question?
Excuse me. I'm happy that people with disabilities have a right to sexual relationships, and I'm not happy that the law treats people with disabilities differently.
Okay, so mixed feelings about it.
Yeah.
And Christina, I'm going to ask you the same question now.
Excuse me.
I'm skeptical as well because if it was a real criminal, you'd be in a right predicament. To my knowledge, they could improve it better.
Okay.
Unless they have a conference and trash these matters out.
Okay, good point. So we haven't had kind of...
And that they should have somebody, services as a part of it to tackle the matter there and then, really.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you think that we need to look at how the new law is working and maybe involve people with disabilities in whether we need to change it?
It needs to be easy.
Sorry.
easy read as well.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not, there isn't an easy to read, not an official version of the
oh no,
law available and
definitely.
easy to read.
That wouldn't be.
Yeah, but it should be because we were able to do that with
We
Catherine.
should be shown exactly what way it is now.
Yeah.
And
So do you think people still don't know what the law is now?
no, I'd say they're mixed reactions and skeptical,
Okay,
really.
fair enough. Okay, so
Okay.
there you have it. So we went through a process to try to change the law. The law did change, but we're not really sure if it changed for the better. And we think there's probably a lot more work still to be done about that. And I'm guessing that's going to be the same for some of the other efforts that we're going to hear about in a minute from our other colleagues internationally about changing other laws on sexual offences.
Yeah, only to say, Eleanor,
You have to
I'm
use the mic.
supporting. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to say, I'm supporting Jay here, but I know we were working together on this. But afterwards, people were confused because it was still a law against protecting people that made people feel that they were different still, and that was the whole idea of what the involvement with Catherine's poem was, that people should have a law that made a tighter view on the consent idea, and that the law should apply to everybody.
Yeah.
So we went in there with this gung-ho sort of idea that we were going to change the law, and then it felt like we were told there was a big success and it had changed, but then it was very difficult to explain that it had changed, but it hadn't really changed enough.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
So we were left confused. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
It is
same
confusing.
boat, I'm
In the model.
confused.
Yeah, it is
I'd say in the
confusing.
model more like it. I'd say we were.
So it is confusing, and I think one of the things that we tried to argue during this process is that we already have a law against rape, we already have law against sexual offences. Those should apply the same way to people with disabilities as to anybody else. But when we were talking to the officials working in the Department of Justice, they were saying, look how hard it is to prosecute people for rape anyway. It's going to be so much harder for people with disabilities if they're raped to prove that this is what happened to them. And it's going to be really upsetting for them to go through the court process. It's going to be really difficult. So we want to make it easier by creating this special law for this group, even though the group themselves are clearly saying, we don't want that, we don't want your special law. And yet, this is what we've ended up
Well,
with.
it wouldn't be.
Use the mic if you're going to talk.
So it wouldn't be in my case, really.
Well, I think,
I'd have more sense than that.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to close the first part of our discussion here, and now I'm going to move on to Tambudzai and Reshma and ask you both about your experiences. So I might start with you, Tambudzai. Could you tell us a little bit about the Southern African Litigation Centre's work in decriminalisation of sexual offences in Southern Africa?
So the Southern Africa Litigation Centre is a regional organisation based in South Africa. We do our work mostly in Southern Africa, in the states that are commonly known as the SADC states. We have been doing a lot of work on the decriminalisation of sexual offences, specifically same-sex activities. So we like to say that the general belief is that in the region, they would basically say homosexuality is illegal. But we like to say it's not illegal. What's illegal in terms of the laws is the acts that are associated with. Yes. So in Botswana, for example, you had certain sections in the penal law that criminalized what they called unnatural activity, unnatural sexual activity. And there was a case, an older case, in which the courts then basically said same-sex activity falls within this. So therefore, same-sex activity is unnatural and is illegal. In Botswana, we have done a lot of work to overturn this particular act. And I'm happy to say that as of the 11th of June, those particular sections have been declared unconstitutional. And we obviously yet to see what comes out of there. Are they going to then create a law that deals with hate crimes and hate offenses that are associated with the effects of having such a law? But for us to get to there, that it was a long journey, but I can say it was very strategic, because the very first thing, or the very first strategy, was to tread carefully. Why I'm saying tread carefully is because if you have an understanding of what happens in that particular region, there are cultural, religious, and social barriers to recognition of the rights of LGBTI persons. And to overcome that is a very big deal, because it's not only society, it's also highly institutional. So from the lawmakers themselves to the judiciary itself, it's very difficult for you to come up with a case like the one that we ended up filing and get a good decision. So initially, there was an attempt some years ago to have those sections declared unconstitutional, and the court said, no, our society is not ready. Perhaps they may be ready at some time, but at this precise moment, our society is not ready to recognize that this is normal. So our approach was what we call an incremental approach. We take small steps that build up to the whole. So in this case, the first case that led us to where we are now was the case for registration of an LGBTI organization called the Lesbians and Gays of Botswana, Legabibo. So the registrar had refused to register the organization on the basis that what they stood for was illegal in the country. And so the Southern Africa Litigation Center then supported this organization, which is a community-based organization of LGBTI people, and filed a challenge at the court against that denial of registration. And what was important about the outcome of this case is that the court ultimately said, what's important is that these people are citizens of the country, like everybody else. They have rights, like everybody else. The fact that they may have, their sexual orientation might be an issue in terms of what the law says does not remove their humanity from them. So therefore, if everyone else has the right to freedom of expression, they also have the right to freedom of expression. And they can then have their organization registered. So having that principle then helped to move on to the next step. So in 2017, a transgender man tried to have his gender marker changed on his identity card, and the registrar again refused, based obviously on the whole concept of same-sex acts. Everything is lumped together, unfortunately. So we also assisted through Legabibo a challenge against the denial of registration. So what the court then did was to take the principles that had been established in the Legabibo case in 2016 and applied them to this particular case to say he is a person. He has rights. And one of his rights is to have an identity, to identify like everybody else. And therefore, the court then ordered that the registrar should change his gender marker. At the same time, there was also a transgender woman who wanted to, who had also had the same problem. And on the basis of that judgment, she also managed to get her gender marker changed. So these are three cases that are coming one after the other. Last year, a student then filed a case in the court, basically saying, I am gay, but I'm not allowed to express myself. I'm not allowed to have sexual relations. It is obviously unconstitutional because everyone else who is not gay is allowed to do this. Why would I, have this this problem? So that is the judgment that I was talking about that just came out on the 11th of June. And we were able to argue, based on the principles that have been established over the years, that there is nothing really that justifies the retention of these laws on the books. And what the Lega people managed to do was they applied to be admitted as an amicus in the case and submitted research for the court, scientific research for the court that highlighted the effects or the detrimental effects of criminalizing same-sex sexual activity on LGBTI persons, one on their human dignity, on their access to services, on the resultant vulnerability to issues like HIV because of lack of access to services. The court actually commented and said, well, Lega Bibo came in as a friend, and they were actually a friend indeed. Because the court managed to actually be able to conceptualize, all the arguments in a very practical way. So I'd like to think that this case is one. The region is quite wide and is a very difficult terrain, but we are hoping that the principles that have been established in this case, we can be able to use them across the region. The similarities in the region is that most of the countries in Southern Africa have constitutions that recognize rights. And they are basically similar to the Botswana situation. So we are hoping it is a matter of interpretation, and of course, because we are also a common law, there are common law systems, we tend to argue the same cases and hope to persuade the judges in the different countries to take up the same. So as far as this issue is concerned, we have a big step, and hopefully it's the beginning of something good.
Great, thank you. So Resh, I'm going to ask you the same question about India now. So how was the process to decriminalise homosexuality? How did that happen in India? Can you talk a bit about that?
Honestly, that's not really my specialty. But it was in end of 2007, where NAS Foundation was the main organization that actually worked towards. It was part of Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code that had to be read down, this was the main organization that was working around that, and it was just till last year, September 2018, was when the ruling came out and it was decriminalized. It took that much of time for all of that to happen, but during that process, of course, there was a lot of back and forth. The one court first kept it in, the other one ruled it out. You know, all of these back and forth happened, but at the same time, I mean, quite similar to also what Tambu was talking about, it's not just what the law is saying, it's also what the religion and the culture is also saying, because there's I mean, India is a large country, second largest with the second largest population. So it's a wide variety of people, not just by skin color, even by language, right? So there are two political parties that actually have two godmen, and they also played a large influence by wanting to stop 377 from being decriminalized. I mean, to the extent of saying that, yes, homosexuality is not just illegal, homosexuality is unnatural. It is animal. We are going back to the times when we were animals. Homosexuality can be cured if you come to my yoga class. So, so you have, I mean, I think I can say his name out because it's there in the newspapers. Baba Ramdev actually put it out. Newspapers covered him saying that his yoga can cure people from homosexuality. So a lot of parents were rushing to get their little kids to yoga now, you know? Yeah, especially boys, to teach them breathing exercises that will help them, you know, cure their homosexuality. The other angle was when he also said, I mean, they also said that homosexuality is also a mental illness. And that just got all kinds of responses, and these people need to be thrown into the institutions to be cured. If they cannot be cured over there, again, they send them to us. So that has been the fight in that respect. Of course, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare last year actually supported the criminalization of 377 because it was talking about how it was going against the HIV campaigns. It was stopping these kind of campaigns from doing their jobs, you know, sex workers, all of that. So that ministry actually supported it. We've had a lot of film stars, of course, celebrities who came out and talking about how, you know, it should be supported. You know, there's nothing wrong in, you know, loving somebody else, even if it is of the same gender or same, you know, sex. But mostly the godmen of India have been calling it unnatural as always. On the other hand, you've had large feminist movements. I mean, many of them have brought in the other angle of religion and the culture, where a lot of our scriptures do portray homosexual activity. You know, gods and goddesses that also display themselves in certain roles. That has really been the country's look from that point of view.
Thank you. So, Tambudzai, can I ask you now about the strategies in Botswana and elsewhere in the region? Do you know to what extent those have been open to and inclusive of disabled people in their work?
Well, I can honestly say we, especially in that particular work, we haven't specifically, I think, deliberately included, but they are open in that there isn't exclusion as such. But what we do have at SAUC is a separate program, I think, on disability work. And obviously there are areas of intersection where we would then have, so for example, we have been working in Zambia on reform of the Mental Health Act, and where issues that affect LGBTI people and persons with disability intersect, we would have. But I would actually be honest and say, in this particular work, yeah, it's an area that I think, you know, there is a lot of room to do more.
Thank you. And Reshma, the same question. I mean, you mentioned specifically queer people being told they were mentally ill. Did that lead to any kind of, I suppose, alliances between survivors of psychiatry maybe, or, you know, and LGBT people? Or were there ways in which disabled people supported the campaign for the repeal of Section 377?
In the beginning, of course, there was no support from either to the other because all of us were fighting our own battles. India is in that stage where almost every single social cause right now is being fought for, which is a great thing. But 10 years ago, because everybody was so busy and you don't have the kind of resources, the finances, the people, the well-being, you don't really have the strength to even reach out and offer your hand. On the other hand, even though there were organizations in the LGBTQI community that were doing their own thing, there were almost no user survivors in India from the psychiatric community. I only entered the system I only started advocacy full on in 2011. Now this is, of course, the third part of the situation because you're also talking about the larger disability group in the country who did not recognize people with mental illness. They didn't want us inside their groups because apparently if they are seen to sit with us in their groups, they would also become mad. Or they would also come under the same legislation that takes away their legal capacity. So let's not include the mad ones over here because we are going to fall under that same, you know, people will call us mad if we even are seen talking to them. So that was the first battle we had to deal with when we entered advocacy. First, fighting with your own parents to come out. Then when you're coming out into a larger group of people with disability to educate them that I can't transfer my madness to you unless you like me to, then we can bond over it and love. You know, it takes time for that to happen. And then to talk about sex. Now, in a country like India, can you just talk about sex, right? Forget LGBTQI. You know, there's so many different angles here in South Asian communities, right? Just saying it out loud is like, can we talk about sex? It's like that, right?
I think we might have some similarities here with that. Yeah.
So it has been difficult. I'm not saying it's not difficult even now. Perhaps now, because all groups have reached a level of individual advocacy or different players in each group, trying to see how we're actually connected in our own ways, that now the LGBTQI communities and the disability groups have also started including the ones who are, you know, saying that, yeah, you guys sort of, we hear you, you know, we kind of see it, and it's also because now they know they can also talk about, they can also include us, because awareness was not even given to them about us. They only saw mental illness as a chemical disorder that the psychiatrist or the system told them that these people are not the same as you. They need to be treated. So in the beginning, LGBTQI says, like, what are you guys talking about? I mean, you're a medical condition. Or disability groups are saying, you're a medical condition. Like, what disability can you have? Right? So it really took time for the cross movement to see how we were similar. I think that started with NCPEDP. I'm sorry, I might not have gotten the abbreviation correct, but it is an organization that was started by the late Javed Abidi. And he made it a point to make sure that every single person who had a disability from any group was in his group. And he even made it a point to even yell at other people in his group, saying that you will not discriminate each other. You will make it a point to learn about the other person's disability. Don't sit with your own group members. Go and mingle around with other people with disability and try and understand, even if it hurts you. And I think he made that personal effort every time just for one or two of us. I mean, you know Lavanya. So in a country like ours, there were just two of us who were literally just being floated around back and forth, each and every group trying to talk about just us and not even talk about sex. Because if we were to talk about sex now, that would bring in a completely different reaction. And even in the mental health group right now, with section 377 being read down, those of us who come out as being queer or identify as not being straight still get a bit sidelined now from our group. So it's a difficult choice to constantly figure out which group I'm supposed to then belong to, because it's already a minority in itself. And if you're talking about then the top 5 disorders in mental illness, and you're reducing it to then schizophrenia, everybody's already scared of you. You know, that's really the larger issue, that it's really difficult then even for these guys to even give me support. And most of the people in the LGBTQI community who would give someone like me support are friends. It's not the community. It's a friend who gets to talk to me over Twitter or over WhatsApp, or perhaps meet me after 5 years and say, hey, I want to kind of understand you better, and then he gets to advocate about the same thing.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think we might pause our discussion here now and open it up to the floor. So I'll invite Lucy back to, is that okay?
Thank you, Eilionóir. So we'll open the